We are talking with Donna Chmara at her home in Hamilton, New Jersey about her book called Personal Recollections, Surviving Genocide. It is based on interviews with 20 survivors who witnessed the aggression against Polish citizens by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union in World War II. She was 10 weeks old, with her parents and their 6 children when they were exiled from their home in eastern Poland. Her first 2 years of life were spent in a Nazi forced labor camp in Germany. The family then spent 5 years in refugee camps before coming to the United States. Taking advantage of opportunities, she earned her bachelor's degree in English from the College of New Jersey and a Master of Arts in English with a major in medieval literature from Temple University in Philadelphia. She represented her new country for 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer in Turkey, where she maintains many dear friendships. Her career as an English teacher on high school level and college level was punctuated by teaching during visits to schools in countries as varied as Poland and Myanmar, Burma. She has led the Polish Arts Club of Trenton as president in projects that advance an appreciation and knowledge of Polish culture and history. Each year, this group awards generous scholarships to high school students and seniors of Polish descent entering institutions of higher learning. Our speaker participates in multicultural projects. She loves to garden, dance, swim, and most importantly, learn from other people's wisdom.
Let's talk about your book. Why did you devote so much of your adult life in researching and interviewing in preparation for this book?
Well, I'm a teacher. I'm no longer in the classroom, but I want to tell the people about what happened, give a fuller history of what happened during World War II. There were millions killed, including millions of Polish Christians from the dual invasion of Poland. Poland was invaded from 2 sides. On September 1st, 1939, it was invaded from the west by Nazi Germany. 17 days later, September 17th, 1939, it was invaded from the east by the Soviet Union. These facts that I've just stated are in history books, no doubt about it. But your general reader, even some people in academia, don't know about what happened in Poland. The word genocide is forceful, it's violent, it's almost, you could say, it's a sin, a sinful kind of attack. But I want to show you why it applies to what happened to the Polish nation, Polish citizens, during World War II. The Random House Unabridged Dictionary of the English language describes a very complex thing in very simple terms. It says, this is a deliberate and systematic extermination of a nation or racial group. Well, the plan was to remove Polish citizens, Christian and Jewish, from the face of the earth. Most people know, and they should know, about the horrific murder of European Jews. They were killed quickly and in mass numbers. But the media and school curricula rarely discuss the fact that Polish Christians died more slowly through forced labor, exposure, hunger, and abuse by 2 governments.
How do we know about Hitler's plans to destroy the Polish nation?
We know about it in very concrete terms. The New York Times, in its November 1945 issue, and I will read directly from that page in the New York Times. German documents read at the Nuremberg war criminals trial revealed that Hitler had ordered his generals to kill without mercy all men, women, and children of the Polish race or language. Some translations of the German say to kill without pity or mercy. Where was this order issued and to whom? British sources tell us that Hitler, and the sources are cited in my book, issued this order to his general at Obersalzberg, Germany, in August 22nd, 1939. And this is the British translation of what I have just read from the New York Times. I have put my death head formations in place. That sounds pretty systematic and deliberate to me. With the command to relentlessly and without compassion to send into death men, women, and children of Polish origin and language. That includes me. Thus, we can gain the living space we need. Some German media also confirm this systematic and deliberate plan. But Hitler was not alone in his invasion of Poland. As I said, his ally invaded eastern Poland 17 days later. They both installed governments, seized personal property. My family lost their home, their land, the house that my father built. They locked thousands into cattle cars, including my family. They deported them, thousands, from forced labor into Germany or the Soviet Union. Millions died from hunger, sickness, killings, labor in scorching summers and freezing winters. And I survived physically. I am very lucky to have survived and to be able to tell you this story. But to further explain why I wrote this book, besides wanting to tell the Polish story, I want to read about my own struggle to survive psychologically, to survive emotionally. So I will read this section to you. I am lucky to be alive. As World War II rages, my mother clutches my shivering body, gray from the cold. Her tiny baby of 10 weeks, that's me, and the rest of the family are locked in a cattle car on our way to Germany for forced labor. 2 years later, we are liberated. It's 1945. I was born in 1943, so I'm 2 years old at that point. After 5 years and 5 overcrowded refugee camps, we sail across the Atlantic Ocean for the safety of America. Yet for me, the war is not over. And for thousands, millions of survivors, the war is not over. There is psychological damage. My nightmares equal any fictional thriller that you see anywhere in the media. Here's one of them. Drenched in sweat, I flee gasping from men in uniform as shrieking bombs descend upon us. Then I awake. The relief of being home in my own bed is like hearing that the firing squad has changed its mind. Mornings bring deliverance, except for the nights when I still shiver in the bunkers of Europe as the piercing whistle of a bomb announces that someone among us will die. Will it be me? Will I be next? 2 journeys set me free from my nightmares. The inner journey was therapy. I faced the cold and thirst when talking about the war. I relived the dread of the wail of an ambulance. I spoke to the dead soldiers I had seen as a child, sprawled out on bloody cobblestone streets. Their horses, with guts spilling out, lay next to them. I buried the soldiers by bringing them into the daylight and covering them with my tears. Next, The Outer Journey, this meeting with other survivors who were exiled, reduced to poverty. But like sturdy trees, they took root. Did others assaulted by war blossom in the new soil? Did they reclaim their humanity? Did they return to the land of the living, both day and night, like I wanted to do? I had to find out. That's why I wrote this book.
Donna, tell us about some of the survivors you interviewed.
I'm happy to do that. The book is in 3 parts. The first part is about the people who survived the Soviet invasion, and the second part is about people who survived the German invasion, and the third part are some of examples of resistance. Now, Germany actually invaded Poland first from the west on the September 1st, but I start my story 17 days later. Soviet Union invaded Eastern Poland. That's where I come from. So I tell the story from my family's point of view. In my town of Naliboki, where I come from, we saw German soldiers 2 years later. We didn't see them in 1939 when Germany betrayed and invaded its Soviet ally in the east. That was July 1941. That's when we first saw German soldiers. But to understand the deportations of people to the Soviet Union, we need a quick look at history. Poland was invaded by its neighbors in 1700s and erased from the map of Europe for 123 years. But during that time, Poland as a national unity existed spiritually. It never died. It just needed to be put back on the map of Europe. My uncle, Chmara, my American name is Donna Chmara. It's been anglicized in my family. It's Chmara, Henry Chmara. He fought in World War I. He was one of the soldiers who risked his life to put Poland back on the map of Europe. 20 years later, during World War II, Stalin ordered soldiers like him to be punished because they helped regain Poland's freedom. This was revenge. He wanted Poland to still be erased off the map of Europe. My uncle and thousands of others were deported for forced labor into the Soviet Union. My family was sent to Russia near the Arctic Circle. That is one of the chapters in the book. Another chapter is about a family for the same reason who was sent to Kazakhstan, and they worked to produce food for the Soviets, Russian soldiers. You never hear about Kazakhstan. Any of the things I've studied about World War II in school, you never hear about people going to Kazakhstan. Well, they were sent to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all of those Soviet countries. Then Germany betrayed its Soviet ally in 1941 and it invaded eastern Poland. They pushed out the Soviet invaders into the forest. They burned down 26 towns, including Naliboki, and they deported us to Germany. Some families escaped these deportations. They survived winters in holes in the ground. Yes, winters they dug up holes, created little foundations, roofs, put stoves in, and that's how they lived. There are some chapters about that. In the meantime, the German soldiers and the Russian partisans continued to fight over control of eastern Poland, of the eastern part of Europe. This ended in a German defeat. So now the families who remained, who survived, living in holes in the ground, were no longer considered Polish citizens. They were now considered Soviet subjects. Their land was taken from them. This is private farmers, private farmers who had been private, like my family, who had been private farmers for generations. Their land was taken from them in order to create communal farms, which, by the way, have now been disbanded. So they weren't much of a success economically. And the Polish people who remained in this part of the world and became Soviet subjects, they also survived forced atheism. I know people who could not get married in church because if they got married in church, they would not be able to have good jobs. And I know some of these people who 40 years later, after the fall of the Soviet Union, tied their bonds after living a shared life for 40 years. They got married in church. I would like to read a story from part 1 of the book about my uncle, Donna Chmara, his wife Josefa, and their daughter Stefania, who were deported to Russia near the Arctic Circle as punishment for my uncle being a Polish soldier. And I mentioned forced atheism. So this is from the book. When Stefania got chickenpox, the commandant of the kolkhoz released Josefa from work to care for Stefania. This allowed her to leave the compound. Facing fierce winds, she made her way to a nearby village. A grandmother opened a crack in the door and said nothing. Josefa said, "My child is sick. Do you have some milk, fish, or cheese to nourish her back to health? I have warm clothes to trade." Eastern Poland was an ethnic crossroad where people spoke, or at least they understood each other's languages. Josefa spoke Russian, but not this dialect. About to close the door, the woman said, "You're from the Polish at the kolkhoz by the lake." Kolkhoz is the communal dwelling, farm. "I can't talk to you. Our government says you are our enemies. Go away." "Are you and I different? I'm a poor woman with a sick daughter. Your family could use warm clothes. Talk of enemies is for governments. We're just people, poor women, you and I, trying to survive." At the chance of warm clothes, the woman let Josefa come in. She motioned for her to sit by the fire. They bartered a thick, warm sweater and hand-knitted wool socks for carrots from the family's cold storage cellar and a good slab of cheese, so poor Stefania would be able to have some protein while she was recovering. The grandmother then offered Josefa a glass of hot tea. The tea is served in glasses, and bread. Josefa gratefully accepted and asked, "Who lives here with you?" The woman stiffened, thought for a moment. She then reached under the little cot where she slept near the fire. She pulled out a neatly folded pile of clothes. This was her wardrobe. She unwrapped a small Byzantine icon of the Blessed Mother. She said, "I hide this. I hide this. My son-in-law is a communist. My daughter-in-law, grandchildren belong to the party. They can't know I have this. If they find out, my own children might report me. My own children might report me for praying. I'll get some kind of punishment. You pray alone, secretly. Let us pray together. For my sick daughter, for your family." They sat in the little hut by the fire, away from the howling wind. They prayed. They talked. They opened their hearts. The human contact felt like a balm upon a wound. They were not enemies. They were now just two women struggling against the cold. The woman invited Josefa to come back. Josefa returned a month later. The grandmother opened the door with a nervous look of apology. She wasn't alone. There would be no tea, no prayer, no nourishing human warmth. They exchanged knowing glances. Disappointed, Josefa trudged through the snow to the next distant dwelling. So that's a selection from part 2 of the book, which deals with the people who lived under the Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe. Now I'd like to go on to part 2, which is people who survived the German invasion. This was a different war depending on your family circumstances. For example, families with many adult workers and few children were sent to work on farms where the crop went to feed the German army. This was a less onerous kind of deportation, even though in some cases people really struggled very hard. Some of them lived in sties, some of them didn't get enough to eat, even though they were growing food. My family was very lucky. They were with a German family that was really decent to them, and by the end of the war, the Polish people and the German people had developed beautiful bonds of affection, respect, and they were really the victorious ones. Now, families with adult workers and many children were either sent back to where they came from, they were discarded in starvation camps, or they were used in forced labor camps. My father was an exceptional carpenter and mason, so my parents and 6 children, first we were put into a starvation camp, but we were moved from the starvation camp to a forced labor camp, where our chances of survival increased slightly, and also thanks to my mother's grit in her being able to sneak out of the forced labor camp and look for food. Now, single people in Germany were used in factories to support the war effort. My godmother was deported at age 19. She worked in an iron smelting factory that produced sheets for building airplanes. Girls were often used as domestics. Antonina, one of the people in the book, she was 15 when she was deported to Germany. Her job was to cook, clean, tend the garden, milk the cows, help with the children in a German home. She was a reward for the husband's high position in the German army. I would like to read an excerpt from the book about Antonina. The 2 youngest of the 4 children stood clutching their parents as the guards decided whom to pull out of line. Casimir and Anna watched with sinking hearts as guards grabbed their 2 teenage daughters, Antonina and Sofia. Antonina told me in our interview, "They put us on a train. We clutched at each other. We lost all sense of time. The train stopped. A woman in uniform got on. She gave my sister some papers and pointed to get off. We were crying and hugging, but she pulled Zofia away from me and yelled for her to leave. The train started. I was terrified without my parents, 15 and alone. The next moments felt to Antonina like a black and white film in slow motion. The train stops. A man in uniform boards the train. He hands Antonina a piece of paper, points to the exit. She steps into the black night. She stands alone on an unlit platform. She hears unfamiliar sounds but sees no human face. A woman in uniform appears. She points to a car. The car lights go on. The woman motions for Antonina to get into the car. The male driver is not in uniform. She got nervous really telling me the story again. The bewildered child gets into the back seat. Sitting on the edge, she wonders, where am I going with this strange man? The driver maneuvers through unlit streets toward the outskirts of town. He comes to a large house with a barn in the back. He stops, checks the papers, motions for Antonina to get out. She grabs her bag of clothes and walks to the front door. A heavy-set blonde woman in her 30s opens the door. The woman walks slowly with large varicose veins on her legs. 4 children run up to see who is at the door. Antonina realizes she was brought here to be a domestic servant. Months earlier, she was determined, in Mariboki, that walking past rotting bodies hanging from telephone poles were not going to stop her from getting her 7th grade diploma. Months later, she has been forced to be a domestic servant. Part 3 of the book is examples of people who resisted what was going on, the occupation of Poland, and the general destruction in the world. There are thousands who resist. There was a very active Polish underground that resisted in many ways. But I'd like to highlight a few people. One of them is Czesław Miłosz. He is the Polish Nobel laureate in literature. He was gracious, based on our correspondence, he was gracious enough to invite me into his home in California, and we were able to sit down and have an interview. He was active in the underground resistance, and he published an anthology of anti-Nazi poetry at a time when it was dangerous to resist the German regime. Another person who was very active in the resistance was a Capuchin priest, Father Hyacinth Dąbrowski. He was, after various imprisonments, he was taken to Dachau, where he was used for medical experiments. He was injected with malaria-infected blood from mosquitoes as part of, he did survive because I got to meet him and talk to him. Another person was a guerrilla fighter who fought on 2 fronts. He fought the German army and also the Polish communist units that were led by Russian paratroopers. And I would like to read part about a girl. She was about 16, 17. She wanted desperately to be a doctor. But even getting a high school diploma took tremendous amount of courage for her. So I would like to, and I like to use this when I speak to school groups, because this points out how powerful an education is. So this is from the book. German authorities forbid high school education for Polish people, but they allowed photography and cooking schools. They knew how powerful an education is. They forbid it. They didn't want people to subjugate people who were able to think for themselves. Before the copy machine, photoshops reproduced documents, and that was one reason why photography schools were allowed. Christina told her father, "I'm 16. I must go back to school. I have to help support the family. I have to be somebody. I want to be a doctor." She told me, "My father helped me find a cooking school because it included chemistry and math. But then he asked around and he found an underground school so I could also study for my high school diploma. During the day, Christina attended cooking school. Then she walked to the forbidden high school, the forbidden school. Homeowners could be jailed for a school discovered in their home, so classes were often held in ruined buildings. Christina studied physics, history, literature, biology, anatomy, Latin. She told me, "They told us we can't have books. We have to remember everything they put in our heads. We dressed warm in the winter to attend secret classes in buildings that had no heat." I earned my, she told me proudly, and I earned my diploma this way. So let's take a look at the cover of the book. This is the cover. It says, "Surviving Genocide, Personal Recollections," and I've given you some examples of the people who are providing us with personal recollections in the book. Each interview was their honest remembrance of what happened, but I did a lot of fact-checking. For example, when the priest said there were 1,000 Polish priests killed in medical experience in Dachau, I'm sure he was telling me the best to his recollection, but I had to fact-check that. This was years later. People's memories are different. So these are stories based on interviews. They read like stories, but they are true. Everything has been fact-checked. And also some of it is validated by the published historians. People had to wear badges to show identity, and I have a poster. This is from the Holocaust Museum in Washington. It's called the Badges of Hate. And people had to wear badges to identify their ethnicity or other personal information about them. But these are also used to identify how many calories a person was allowed legally. Legally, this was the law. How many calories a person was allowed. For example, Polish people were allowed something like 600 to 700 calories a day. Those are clearly starvation levels. So when you went for your bowl of turnip soup and your slice of bread, you had that badge that showed what you were entitled to legally. Jewish people, I think their calorie allowances were even less, 300 or 400 calories a day. And some other examples of badges. So here is the Jewish Star of David that they had to wear. Here is the Polish badge. It was really like a piece of cloth, I think sometimes, that they had to wear. There's criminals where it was like a blue-green triangle. Jehovah's Witnesses had a purple triangle. This was some black triangles were used to identify Czech from what is now the Czech country. So this is very informative. It gives you a sense of, because it's very important for me to make the point that Polish people were not the only people that suffered. So many different people suffered simply because they were who they were. And it didn't fit the master plan. So it's very important that part of it was that indicated how much food people could have.
80 years has passed since World War II. How do you live with what happened?
Well, I think the survivors showed me the way. I'm lucky to be alive. First of all, I grew up in a large, loving family, and I was the youngest of 6 children. So much of my brothers and sisters' attention went to keeping me alive. And the youngest of 6, there are only 2 of us left now, but I thank them every day in my prayers at night for everything they did to find food for me, to keep me alive. But even now, 80 years later, well, I started this work about 20 years ago, but even 40, 50, 60 years later, when I interviewed the survivors, their memories were still so painful that at some point during the interview, we both cried. Those tears just flowed out about what they had lived through. Yet, at the same time, what I discovered was that these were not broken people. They were not defeated. After the war, they created lives based on love, as my parents did. I'm a survivor, and I have lived with survivors all my life. They taught me to go on with life, not to be defeated, and most important of all, they taught me not to be poisoned by hate. This was hate, and we were victims of hate. And what I learned from the people that survived was that we are not to be poisoned by hate. The ultimate message in my book comes from the survivors. They have shown me the danger of identifying solely with a group and ideology rather than with the fact of our shared humanity. The fact of our shared humanity. British historian Norman Davies was gracious enough to write a foreword to my book. I'd like to read what he said. Donna Chmara's collection of personal reminiscences is most moving and valuable. The testament of individuals is always more telling than faceless statistics. This is a story of adversity and triumph. And I think that the survivors were people who ultimately triumphed. Let me explain to you why I think that. When we sing at the national anthem, Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła, Poland is not yet lost. And this was written 123 years ago. But Poland is back on the map of Europe today. That is a national story of adversity and triumph. But for survivors who do not lose their humanity, who are still capable of love, it's a personal story of adversity and triumph. No matter what someone does to you, as long as you don't become like them, as long as they don't plant the seed of hatred in your heart, he has not won. You are still a free person. You are untouched by the hatred. You are free and you are capable of love.
Beautiful. Okay.
Excellent. Charming and wonderful and brilliant.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is a wall which celebrates some of the women that I have learned from, some of the women that have been an example of intellect, wisdom, courage, kindness, and compassion. This is the Slavic Black Madonna that I brought back from my last visit to my town where I was born of Naliboki. Used to be part of Poland, now it is part of Belarus. This is my mother. She was a very tough woman, but you have to be tough if you're going to survive a war and keep 6 children alive. When I was ready to go out when I was growing up, I couldn't leave the house until she looked me over from top to bottom. And then she approved whether I looked right to go out or not. And I used to resent it, and now I am so grateful for what she taught me. This is my late husband's mother. She also sounded like a very good woman, and so she is here getting her moment of celebration. This is my picture with the tiger. I've had the opportunity to travel several times to Southeast Asia with some friends, and this is called this was the Tiger Temple in Thailand, where the monks rescue baby tigers. The parents are killed by poachers, and they leave the baby tigers there, so they rescue them. They bring them into where they live, and one way that they make money is to have people, crazy Americans like me, come in and take pictures with the tiger. But very strict conditions. The tigers have been fed. It's in the afternoon. The tigers are sleeping. We can't wear any bright colors. We have to wear cool colors. And there are people standing around with a rifle just in case. I'll never do it again. Okay? This is another version of the Black Madonna. And this is we three sisters. This is my oldest sister, Yanka. I loved her so much. My sister, Mary, she's still alive. And this is me. And this is new girls, new babies being born into the family. And so life goes on, and we continue our traditions. This is a gift that someone gave me. It's a very significant gift because of my interest in my studies of English literature, my interest in medieval literature, medieval English, Chaucer, and this medieval knight is holding a pen, and I really believe that the pen is more powerful than the sword. Not in the short term. We see a lot of destruction. But thinking of Polish history, the pen is more powerful than the sword. We have 4 or 5 Nobel laureates in literature in Poland, and these people kept the idea and the spirit of Poland alive when it was erased off the map of Europe. And so Polish people had a literature, a tradition that they continued to live, even though they didn't have the borders. So this is one of the most significant gifts anyone has ever given me. One of my great pleasures is growing my own flowers, and I like to have fresh flowers, bouquets of fresh flowers in the house, from starting with daffodils in March and ending with chrysanthemums in October. And for today's coming together and talking about Polish history, and by the way, I hope as a writer I am part of that tradition that keeps Polish heritage and culture alive. I put together a white and red bouquet because white and red are the Polish colors, and the gladiolas are just coming out, but we had a gladiola to give us a white and red bouquet, the Polish colors. These are some of the beautiful gifts I've received from my Turkish students. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the 1960s, and years later, our students found my roommate and me once the technology was available. That was one of the biggest surprises of my life. We went back to Turkey for a big reunion, and now we're friends. They come here. When they come here, they stay here in my home. When I go to Turkey, I stay in their homes. And so these are some of the very precious gifts that I have received from them. There are little souvenirs all over the house from my time in Turkey because I still really love the people there. And there's Polish things. I love the Bolesławiec dishes. So everything has some sort of adventure behind it. So I really enjoy the Bolesławiec dishes, the big ones, the little ones. So we're going to be having some lunch, and we're going to be having it on top of the Polish Bolesławiec dishes. This is one of my favorites. And the interesting thing about it is the way they make it. On the back of each item it's individually made, there's the name of the artist. As far as they're concerned, this is a work of art, and you have where it was made. There was the person T. Liana is the person who made this artwork, handmade in Poland, and it's a labor of love, I think. Okay, this is where I like to live, practically live in the summer. The rose bushes are just finished blooming, but there will be, as long as you keep on deadheading and cutting off these spent flowers, is going to be another crop coming up. Plants are amazing. The little red leaves that come out, they're going to turn into flowers. They're just amazing. That's a fiacre over there, Saint Fiacre. He is the patron saint of gardening and gardeners.
Let's go closer to it.
And if you come over here, you will see. Well, I have these shields here because they're supposed to give him some light during the winter, during the nights. But let me show you what's here. There is a bunny. There is a spade. There is a rake and some flowers because he's a gardener.
So he's a patron of gardeners?
Yeah, he's the patron saint of gardeners. Yeah, he came out of Ireland, but he was connected to France. There was a connection there. And so he's looking out for things. He's taking care of things. So I like to have different perennials at different times of the year. So one thing, like the roses just finished blooming, but something else is starting to bloom. So there's always something blooming. And over here, these woods are not officially, but they're almost like a wildlife preserve because there are deer, those things with the raccoons. There are raccoons. There's all kinds of animals back here, and I love to sit here watching. If you're quiet for a long time, they come in, they drink the water. The birds come in, they take baths, and of course the trees provide so much clean air. And so, you can see, as you can see, I love to put sometimes I don't even want to wear the gloves because when I'm planting the flowers, I want my hands in the soil. I can always clean up afterwards. But, so I just every year it's something different. And this is my tiny, tiny orchard. These are apple trees. You can see the apples here.
Oh.
Yep. That's a persimmon tree. I haven't gotten persimmons. I love persimmons. Haven't gotten persimmons yet, but there's hope. And behind there, that's a wild cherry tree. And this year is the first year I saw some wild cherries there. So this is the little orchard.
How old is the apple tree?
The apple tree is about 10 years old. And I keep it trimmed. I keep it down, but you have to make sure you protect it against the squirrels. So when they're ready to be eaten, you have to kind of spray them with something. But maybe this year we'll get to eat the apples. And that's it. That's basically this is my favorite part of the house.
Oh, you don't want to show me your outdoor living room?
Oh, well, I'm not sure.
No.
This is...
Yeah. Let's go there.
Okay. So this is the lily garden over here. And some of them are still in full bloom. Some are. And lilies are amazing. They're like a family, but they have so many different varieties. Like that's a lily, and this is a lily. There are many different types of lilies, and this is just for fun. I had some trees cut down, and so now this sweetheart is a present. It planted itself. It was just, I saw a green thing coming out one time, got bigger and bigger, and then the flowers started. And it's been like this for like about 2 months now. And most perennials, if it's a perennial, are good for like a few weeks. And it's here. So, and this, I make a compost pile, everything in the kitchen, coffee grinds, tea bags, potato peels, everything comes here, I put in soil. turn it, and eventually it goes back into the soil.
How many years do you have to wait?
6 months, a year. I keep turning it. So every year I've got more. And this is really full of nutrition. And it keeps the weeds down. So, but we call this my outdoor living room. Because I like the trunks of the trees. They're
Okay. Thank you, Donna, for showing us your private kingdom
well, thank
outside
you.
your house,
Thank you very much.
and for the beautiful
It is.
interview. Thank
But
you very much.
I'm happy it's not private, but friends like you come. It's very happy to share the beauty with you.
Thank you.